Welcome to The Signal, the podcast companion to the only intelligence report in men's health and fitness that tells you what to watch, what to ignore, and why. I'm Andy Feltovich, founder and CEO. Every episode, we go deeper than the newsletter. Longer conversations, harder questions, and the stories behind the data. We don't do bro science, we don't do wellness theater, and we question everything except questioning. Every dogma on trial, guilty until proven innocent. If you're new here, The Signal is produced by Andy Feltovich, the flagship company of the Collegium of Order and Flow. Subscribe to the newsletter at the-signal.us. Don't forget the hyphen. And if this episode is worth 5 stars to you, leave a review. It's the single best thing that you can do to help us cut through the noise. Now let's get into it. Today we have Tavis Piattoly, Director of Sales and Dietitian at OmegaQuant Analytics, home of the Omega-3 Index developed by Dr. Bill Harris, the most rigorously validated omega-3 biomarker in the world. Tavis has over 15 years of experience as a credentialed sports dietitian, including time with the New Orleans Saints, New Orleans Pelicans, and Tulane Athletics. He is also co-founder of the My Sports Dietitian and the Liquid Fuel Sports Hydration brands. As always, this is for informational purposes and should not be interpreted as medical advice. First, welcome Tavis. Great honor to have you here today. We're going to start off, as we always do, asking about your Batman origin story. So how did you come to OmegaQuant?
Yeah, well, it's kind of funny. I was working for a company for about 5 or 6 years at the time called the Taylor Hooton Foundation. COVID hit, and then just a friend kind of made a recommendation and said, "Hey, look, think you would be a great fit. They're looking for somebody on the clinical education side." I loved working for the Taylor Hooton Foundation. Nothing but incredible things to say about the people, Donald, Brian, Don Sr., the entire family. But travel was starting to pick back up. COVID was moving out. And with a daughter at the time around 7 or 8 years old, she was getting involved in more sports, theater, musical production. So it made it like being on the road 25, 30 times a year was really challenging. I applied for a job as the clinical educator. Another person got it, but they said, look, you would be great for sales. You have a sales background, working when you were in the fitness industry. Would you be interested? I was like, absolutely. And then that's kind of how things got kicked off, and met with the team and joined in 2021, I believe. Yeah, so I'm on year 5 now.
Oh, I'm interested in the work you did at the Taylor Hooton Foundation, working on subjects very near and dear to my heart, in particular performance-enhancing drugs, or APEDs, appearance and performance-enhancing drugs. I just found out that I've been omitting the A. Uh, Supplement safety. Tell us about the work you did there.
Yeah, we just traveled the country and spoke in high schools, colleges, athletic sports teams, went into different organizations and different groups, a lot of conferences as well, athletic trainers, etc. Just talking about Taylor's story. Taylor was a young man. He was like many young male athletes today, or female athletes too, but a lot of the male young athletes are trying to figure out, how do I get bigger, stronger, faster? And at that time, giving bad advice to young individuals was pretty common. Still, it is today. It's take this, take that, not change your diet. So Taylor found out that maybe using anabolic steroids was an answer. His coach at the time said, you just need to get as big and strong as possible. Go see what your friends are doing. And some of his friends on his baseball team were using steroids. So he decided to make that uneducated decision. And unfortunately, what happened was, when he went to a doctor, it took him a while. His parents noticed a lot of changes in behavior, and eventually he quit cold turkey. And then a lot of, obviously, in young individuals, hormonal changes, emotional changes, and he took his own life. So we went into these places, these schools and conferences, to really just educate, especially young individuals, about the risk of these types of drugs.
It's an important point you brought up, just doing what your friends are doing. And you and I, we do this professionally. I've been doing this at the highest levels internationally for a decade, and I still fall find myself falling into that trap of just slapping stuff in my body, on my body. Like I went to a sports pharma summit a couple weeks ago, and I realized that there's not just Bengay and BioFreeze. There's like four primary active chemicals, and each has a different purpose. And I was like, back when I was fighting and whatnot, we just slap stuff on our bodies until it stops hurting. We didn't read the ingredients or do any research. So yeah, again, just goes to show it's a discipline, right? So I'm gonna be gonna lay it on our listeners. I'm very skeptical of testing. We talked about this at the Sports Pharmacy Summit where we actually met 2 weeks ago. And I'm a stern critic of what I call the fetishization of testing in this industry. So we go out and we run a panel of tests and we get that dopamine, I'm doing something hit, and it basically a lot of times comes down to a distraction. Uh, you know, it's easier to measure something than it is to actually do hard stuff with trade-offs, get your butt off the couch, move around, sleep right, eat right. But you convinced me. The omegas are different. It's worth the time and trouble. It's there is more light than heat. So tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, look, omega-3, I know we kind of talked about that point was it's one of those nutrients, unlike iron, unlike vitamin D, unlike other nutrients, that you can truly determine when there's a deficiency, right? If someone is anemic or has low levels of iron, there's side effects with that. There's fatigue, with things like vitamin D, rickets, which you don't see too often. But with omega-3, 90% of people are walking around with low blood levels, but there's no really signs or symptoms. There's nothing like you're sleeping for 12 hours, which some people would probably love, or you might have inflammation, but inflammation can be caused by so many different things, and you might not be associating low blood levels. Might be just part of that problem, where higher blood levels of omega-3 could lower that. So I think that's the one thing that's unique about omega-3. It's still an unknown biomarker that people don't are not as aware that it's really important, and why it should be maybe part of every standardized protocol, yeah, especially for performance or for just general health assessment.
Okay. So that's right. There's no nothing that dots you in the eye like rickets. Your legs start bowing, scurvy, your lips start bleeding, etc. So talk us talk us through what we're actually testing for, and a couple points. You're not a physiologist, and also we don't have enough time to get into the intricacies of lipid metabolism, which would be useful. I wish there was more work on that. There just isn't. We don't have the data that we have on uh, for instance, protein and carbohydrates, but we need a little bit of lipid physiology and metabolism to motivate what follows. So, one of the eye openers for me meeting you at the conference was that we tend to zero in on EPA and DHA, but those are only just a couple of the fatty acids. We've got a whole buffet of omega 3s, omega 6s. Walk us through what the universe is like and what each of them do.
Yeah, I mean, there's four omega-3 fatty acids, EPA and DHA, are essential. I always have trouble trying to pronounce these fatty acids, no matter whether it's doco, hexa, onic fatty. I can never pronounce them well, but EPA and DHA, essential fats. You have to get them from the diet, primarily marine sources. So any cold water fish, even non-cold water fish, but highest amounts, but things like Pacific herring, salmon, sardines, mackerel, anchovies are going to really be predominant in EPA and DHA. Then you have your more vegetarian-based ALA, chia, flax, walnuts. These are good omega-3 fats. The problem with them is they don't convert to a high enough percentage, in the diet to EPA and DHA in order to influence blood. So that's why we not only do we see 90% of people have low levels, but vegans and the US military usually have the lowest levels. Why is that? Well, vegans, because they're not consuming algal-based sources, which is the only way for them to increase blood. Military, just because they're not eating omega-3 rich foods and they're training at high intensities. Then we have this other molecule or fatty acid, DPA, that you do see small amounts in fish, but that really has no influence on blood. You have to consume EPA and DHA on a regular basis, and I know we'll talk about how often, what are the best sources to truly influence the red blood cell membrane, and that's kind of how we measure the blood at OmegaQuant. We look at a couple of different ways. We look at the red blood cell, and we also look at plasma. But I know we'll talk about kind of what separates those two and what makes them different.
Let's dial into the military situation because I always like to know where my tax money's going. Why aren't they eating right?
I don't think it's that they're not eating right. I just think, when you look at cost, it's probably not it's probably cost prohibitive to probably feed them salmon 3 to 4 days a week versus other foods. That it's no different than in most organizations that have even bigger budgets. You don't see that as part of the diet. Plus, I don't think people love in most cases. Like I'm not. I just really over the last couple of years acquired a really good taste for some good quality salmon, and especially if you prepare it correctly. But for many years in my mind, it was fishy. I wouldn't eat it, so I was like a lot more convenient to take the supplemental form. Plus, maybe these are younger individuals. Their diet is maybe not as diverse as we get a little bit older. We're more likely to try things that we know are more beneficial for our health. But I think it's probably cost prohibitive that why the military is not having as high levels as maybe the average consumer.
Well, that's unfortunate. Institutional eating, so hospitals, schools, prisons. That's a big portion of the country what they eat, and hence a big portion of our medical problems. So that's probably something we can to be addressed on the policy side, feeding them better and doing that cost benefit of what that does for health outcomes. Because when you talk about that size population, it's actually a needle mover. Before we go on, I want to dial into the vegetarian population, and I try to sidestep the carnivore versus vegan controversies. But I mean, the fact of the matter is, we're omnivores, and once you cut out an entire classes of food, whether that's plants and vegetables, whether that's meat, you're going to have to compensate in some way. So, you want to take a second to talk about the unique needs of vegans and the issues that they face with omega fatty acids by not eating meat?
Yeah, well, I mean, they don't eat fish. I mean, there's some vegetarians out there that might call themselves more pescatarians. They're fine. And if they're eating fish that's rich in omega 3, 3 to 4 days a week, they'll be okay. But even meat eaters, I mean, carnivores, we've been trying to work with the group to test carnivores for omega 3. If they're only eating meat and not eating fish or not taking fish oil supplements, they're going to be deficient or have low levels just like anybody else. Vegans are going to be really the lowest because they're probably not taking an algae or algal based source. They're probably consuming a lot of chia, flax, walnuts, hemp seeds, which have very little conversion. 3 to 5% converts to EPA and DHA, which is why we see their average levels are usually between 2 and 3%. The average American is usually somewhere between 4 and 5%, where we see the optimal range for optimizing health, 8 to 12%.
So, talked about there's the false dichotomy. You mentioned they're all essential omega 3s, omega 6s. There's kind of that false dichotomy that the omega 3s are the healthy, omega 6s are the unhealthy, the bad fats, if you will. And one of the reasons I invited you on this podcast is you had some very insightful things to say about some research that wasn't aware of, that I probably should be more aware of. Uh, Omega 6s and oxidized fatty acids might not be devil incarnate and public enemy number one, like we might assume if we spend too much time on social media. So, walk us through some of that research.
Yeah, I mean, I know Dr. Harris can probably talk, and Dr. Bill Harris is our founder. He's a credible fatty acid scientist. So there's some of the research I'm familiar with on the omega 6 side, really looks at there's 7 omega 6s. And one particularly, most of what we get in the diet is from linoleic acid. As people might hear in the world of influencers, they're called them seed oils. So if it's soybean oil, if that's sunflower oil, a lot of the oils, and whether it's processed foods or even potato chips and cookies, some of those are going to be organically driven as well. Cold sunflower oil. They all do what's called, when you consume high amounts of those types of fats, they're going to increase your blood linoleic acid. There's also what's called arachidonic acid and some other omega-6 fats that I'm not a fatty acid specialist, so I can't really go into details. What's some of the things our lab has published, and actually a new paper just came out that we're going to be talking about regarding body fat, which may be of interest, but higher blood linoleic level acid, or higher linoleic acid levels in the blood, not just consuming processed chips, which we don't recommend people just consume a ton of processed food. But what we do know is higher linoleic acid in the blood is associated with lower risk of cardiovascular disease, heart attack, strokes, but also diabetes. We're working on a study right now with the NIH. It's a grant. We're in, I think, phase 2 to look at predicting people's risk for diabetes based on blood linoleic acid as well as other fatty acids and some things that we're looking at, as well as some other another test looking at dementia that may not be related to omega-6 and more other fats. So I think we have to just stop using the blanket statement that seed oils are bad and then really talk about what does the research say around measuring blood. And the research tells us it's maybe not as problematic as some of these influencers may be seeing. So that's why we like to look at randomized control trials that measure blood and say, look at those long-term outcomes.
Yeah, it all comes down to the RCTs. There's, of course, they've got their issues like everything else, but if you spend too much time on social media and I'm trying to detox it, mouse models, correlational studies, and legit RCTs kind of get lumped together, and nobody really understands the nuances of anything when they blindly and reflexively repeat them. So you, you provided an excellent segue, Dr. Harris, and the work that you're doing at OmegaQuant. Let's talk about what you're actually measuring. So when I send my test in, which we might do a little later on this call, I've been putting it off, so we might actually just prick some fingers later on the interview. Uh, so when I prick my finger, which I'll do later, and send you the blood, you're looking at the red blood cell membrane, if I understand correctly. So why are you measuring the RBCs specifically, and what are you looking for in that
Yeah.
sample?
Yeah, so with the RBC, it's just a longer status of omega-3 status. If you did a blood draw of your omega-3 and you sent that, or you went to a blood draw lab, they're going to measure plasma. So that's like measuring blood sugar for the omega-3. It's only looking at your omega-3 status over the last 24 hours. And you have to fast when you take that type of test. And you have to remove omega-3 from your diet, fast for at least, 12 hours, and then probably over the last or the previous 1 or 2 days, don't eat anything rich in omega-3. With our test, we're measuring this almost like a little bit longer than a hemoglobin A1C that looks at blood sugar over 3 months. The red blood cell life cycle is 4 months. So we can see, it's almost May 1st. So we can see what someone's been eating from February 1st or January 1st to May 1st and measure their omega-3 status, which gives you a much better indication of what they've been consuming for the last 4 months.
So you didn't mean to, but you done poked the bear. So you hit on one of my pet peeves with research. So you said four months, and that's important. And my kind of delusion, my mad scientist working hypothesis is that the reason we don't have enough research on fatty acids and the reason we don't have as much research on those as we have carbohydrates and proteins is because, like you said, the turnover is 4 months. And when your research subjects are, college kids who are just volunteering to do it for beer money and college credit, you get, maybe 6 8 weeks out of them. You're not going to get full 4 months, and there's not going to be clear performance increases or decrements that you can measure. So creatine, we give them creatine, then we have them lift stuff. Protein, we have them do leg extensions because the vastus lateralis is the easiest muscle to biopsy, even though it's a useless exercise. So we can measure protein synthesis, get a paper out, get tenure. Carbohydrates, we run them, we deplete their carbs, we replenish their carbs, we measure it, we get a nice study. But red blood cells, like you said, 4 months turnover. So in order to get some more research on omega-3s and omega-3 supplementation and performance, we're going to need longer than 6 to 8 weeks. and it's not going to be some kind of clean, clear, cut and dried result like we get with, like I said, protein, creatine, carbohydrates. So what's it going to take to get? And the other thing is funding. Somebody's got to bankroll this, and we've got lots of we've got lots of creatine, lots of protein, lots of carbohydrate supplement companies that are going to fund this research. So, putting you on the spot, what's it going to take to get some decent goddamn performance data on omega-3 supplementation?
Well, we do. I mean, it depends on the outcome and what we're measuring. But, there's been studies looking at concussion outcomes. There's been studies looking at just neurofilament light in the brain. Dr. Jeff Heilson, or Housen he's with the U.S. military out of Bethesda. He's done some pretty good work in collegiate athletes looking at omega-3 dose, omega-3 index, omega and strength power, muscle soreness. There's been muscle soreness studies done, obviously levels of inflammation, heart rate, recovery time. So there's been a pretty good bit of studies. We're going to be involved with a UK organization soon that's going to be starting, I think, this year, where we're going to be, I think, one of the first studies to get athletes up to 8% first, then study them. A lot of the studies now dose them, measure them, or test their blood. Most of them are going in low levels, 4 to 5%. Then we'll test power, strength, get initial baseline markers, then dose them, then retest them. And obviously you should see some improvements in outcome. Well, now we're going to dose them. And I don't know it's been a while since I've looked at the protocol, but when the organization, and we found a great scientist that's been doing a lot of work in this area, said, let's dose them first. Let's get them to an optimal range, and then let's see what happens. And, do those that are in optimal ranges go into an exercise protocol? Do their markers change over the course of time? So it'll be interesting to see over the next year what happens with that study. But yeah, there's been a pretty good bit of research on the performance side with omega-3, and it's been pretty positive for the most part, especially when blood levels get higher.
All right. Well, maybe I just need to get on PubMed and do some better research. You mentioned the 8%, the 8% mark, and how most people come under it. How did we come up with those bands and the magical 8% mark?
Yeah, a lot of that started with Dr. Harris's research in cardiovascular disease, where they were measuring coronary heart disease risks, like looking at predictors, almost a better predictor of long-term cardiovascular health than maybe just cholesterol data. But some of Dr. Harris's early studies from '04, '08 were looking at just, the omega-3 index as a predictor for coronary heart disease. And then they started looking at some studies in brain health, and then started looking at inflammatory health, and then started looking at immune health. And really, it was pretty set that a lot of these, once you hit that 7-8% mark, it was almost like the tipping point where that level of significance started to really kick in. You see benefits like coronary heart disease. If you were at 3.8%, I don't know the exact percent or indication, but you go from like 3 to 6, there's a nice drop in risk. You go from 6 to like 8, there's another nice drop in risk. So from obviously being really low, less than 4 to 8, there's about a 35 to 40% lower risk for developing coronary heart. Things like primary heart attack, reductions in inflammation are all kind of in that same boat where you're really low, your risk is a little bit higher. You get to that 8%, your levels really drop. And then we have a desired range where we feel 8 to 12 is where we want people to be. And then after that, we don't really know what happens in regards to if you're 16%, like some of the Eskimos are in the 20%. Do we have more problems? We don't really know because there's not a lot of people to study that are in those ranges. And a lot of people like to focus on the ratios, like omega-6 to 3, and they just say chase the ratios. Well, it's like a seesaw effect. Andy, if your omega-6 to 3 and your arachidonic acid to EPA levels are going to be high if your omega-3 is low. If omega-3 goes up in a linear fashion, omega-6 to 3 and AA to EPA go down in a linear fashion. So that's why we say get the omega-3 up and the ratios will take care of themselves. And that's the test you have, that you and I discussed. That's what it's going to measure. It's going to measure your omega-3 index and your ratios.
So let's talk about, of course, if a little bit is good, then a lot must be better. That's kind of the unfortunate mindset in our industries, especially with meathead athletes and recovering meathead athletes like myself. So I've seen recommendations all over the place. So some evidence, some recommendations, I should say, for enhanced recovery and soreness, 4 to 6 gram range per day for supplementation. Ben Greenfield, who generally I have a lot of respect for, does some good book. His book, I like I push his book Boundless. He recommended hyper supplementation in the range of 15 grams a day for injuries. Let's talk about the Eskimos. You brought that up, so I want to dig into that for a second. Anecdotally, again, not RCTs, but a lot of correlational work that they have low cardiovascular incidence of cardiovascular disease, being despite high incidence of obesity and smoking. But the flip side of that is I believe they suffer more bleeding aneurysms, possibly, presumably as a result of those high omega-3 levels. What are your thoughts on that? And the
Yeah,
broader point, the tipping point, when is more not better?
yeah, I don't know the answer to the aneurysm part, and if that's the case, and what those studies have looked at. Not for, I am familiar with. I know Dr. Harris referenced a study that was done, I think, in 1972, with looking at EPA levels, clotting, and the fact that those Eskimos, and again, never read that full study, um, had a much lower risk of heart attack and heart disease. And could that be to high levels of EPA consumption? What we've seen on the bleeding side, and some of the stuff that I've seen him present, is the fact that you actually bleed less. They did some open heart surgery studies where those that had higher blood omega-3 actually bled less than those that had lower omega-3. Again, I don't know the aneurysm studies and what's involved in that process, but I do know from a brain perspective, we see less neuroinflammation in the brain especially when you feed it DHA. We've seen that in concussed athletes, looking at neurofilament light over the course of an entire football season, that brain inflammation or neuroinflammation increases for those athletes that are constantly colliding in the head, small micro traumas throughout the season. But those that got 2 grams of DHA didn't have nearly as much of a rise versus those that got nothing. Like they had almost a very small elevation in that blood marker. We still need to look at other markers, but at least it gave us some. This is like the early 2015, 2016 John Oliver study that showed, hey, DHA should be part of the treatment protocol, and maybe even the risk mitigation protocol to get athletes to a higher level that have a higher risk of head injury. But yeah, just not familiar with the bleeding and the brain stuff.
Yeah, interesting, but what you said about bleeding generally, because if anybody who's gone under the knife, or if you're like me and you've gone under the knife one too many times, I always tell you don't uh, moderate or eliminate your omega-3 consumption prior to surgery. And folks at home, do what your surgeon says. We're not telling you to disregard your surgeon's advice, but it looks like there might not be a simple mechanistic relationship between higher fish oil and bleeding.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I'd have to look at that study. Did they use a high quality oil? Did they measure blood? Or did they just look at a very processed oil in ethyl ester form that may have been more problematic? Not really sure. I'd have to really look at the study to see where they got. There's a lot of other studies that said, oh, fish oil causes this, and then you look at the paper and go, that paper was really poorly designed and wasn't there long enough, didn't use a good quality product, or didn't measure blood.
So let's talk about you wear a lot of hats. Registered dietitian is one. So let's say, like you said, there's no smoking gun with omega-3 deficiency. It's not scurvy. You don't come in with bleeding lips. It's not rickets. You don't come in with bow legs. So there's no smoking gun. You your client gets a low reading, sub 8. That's our working hypothesis. 8% seems to be the kind of the one of the magical thresholds. How does it go down on a consult? What are the next steps?
Yeah, first thing is just to determine what their intake currently looks like. If the goal is to optimize omega-3, do they like fish? Obviously, food first is always a great approach to take. Some of the highest blood levels we've ever seen in the lab are people that just only eat fish. It's hard to get above 12% supplementation only, just because the natural triglyceride form of that oil is coming from those fatty fish. So people that eat fish 5, 6, 7 days a week, they're going to have really good levels. So, but if they're like me, to where I'm not going to eat salmon 5 or 6 days a week for a lot of different reasons, variety, maybe cost, maybe I just don't want to eat it. then we have to find an alternative. Maybe eat fish a couple of days a week and supplement a couple of days a week, and just figure out a way to increase whatever they're doing. If they're like, all right, I'll start with supplementation, then we'll find them a good quality product and oil to make sure we maybe take a small amount each day to build up and try to get them a dose that I know is going to get them to an optimal range.
Yeah, so one quick warning for our folks at home, type of fish matters, and I bring that up because there was one incident, an athlete, his everyone else on the team tested deficient, but this one athlete, his omegas were off the chart, and he found out he was eating tuna every day, and we said, "Oh, holy doggy do," and then we tested him for mercury, and of course, that was off the chart too. So type of fish matters for our folks at home. And we'll get into heavy metals, heavy metal contamination in a minute. Actually, not in a minute. We're going to get in there right now. So let's talk about make, model, vintage. We've decided that supplementation is going to be part of our stack. So I'm with you, whole foods first, but hard to get there with whole foods alone. And then you run other risks, like we mentioned, mercury. So supplements we've decided are going to be part of our strategy, part of our stack. We go to the store, what do we buy? What matters? Make, model, vintage, matrix, form. Walk us through that.
Yeah, I mean, fish oil comes in a bunch of different forms. Predominantly, when you walk into a grocery, pharmacy, big box store, probably 90% of what sits on that shelf is going to be manufactured as an ethyl ester. What does that mean? When fish is caught from a manufacturing facility, so the manufacturing facility, not the brand that you buy fish oil from, they're not the ones going out in the water catching the fish. It's the oil manufacturers. And most of those good oil manufacturers, four of them are in Norway, some are in China. The largest DSM is in the United States. And most people, when they're buying their fish oil, they don't know where that oil is coming from. They just know, oh, what's the source? They look at the ingredients, they look at how much fish oil they think they're getting. But those oil manufacturers, because we work in that space and we use the oldest supplier in the world called GC Reber out of Norway. They bring their ships, they go catch fish. Anchovies, mackerel, sardines are predominantly caught Peru and Chile, Norway, and some other places depending on the fish type, salmon, herring, etc. They bring it back to the manufacturing facility, go into tanks, and I don't know the exact process from start to finish, but it goes through extensive testing, and it goes through testing for metals, oxidation, all these different parameters. If it's a good oil manufacturer, they're going to ensure that everything they're putting out to be made into soft gels, capsules, whatever, is going to be oil quality is preserved. These are companies that have regulations by specific organizations that say you have to meet these levels. If you don't meet these levels for certain heavy metals, certain oxidation parameters, you can't sell oil. So I think a lot of them, there's a lot of misconception in the industry about all fish oil is rancid and blah blah blah, and I think we'll get into that. But yeah, I mean the most effective. So going back to an ethyl ester, when you catch fish, you catch it in the natural triglyceride form, and then if that oil manufacturer wants to make an ethyl ester to sell, then they add an ethanol to it and strip it of its triglyceride form, which means it's less bioavailable, which means less absorbed in the blood, and you have to take more of it. Ethyl esters you have to take with a source of fat. So a meal with olive oil or butter or cheese or anything that has a source of fat to increase absorption. If you take it on an empty stomach, it's not very effective. What our lab did was we did a study with Penn State and Rachel Walker's lab to determine the most effective way to raise blood EPA and DHA levels and kind of how much is needed based on score. We saw triglyceride form oil or reesterified triglyceride. That's where they converted back to an ethyl ester, back into a triglyceride. Still has the same effect as a natural triglyceride. And then that's the most effective way to raise blood EPA. The other is a krill or a phospholipid. It's just 5 to 10 times more expensive than a triglyceride. Another is a monoglyceride, which also seems to work pretty well as things like cod liver oil. I don't know if that's been well tested. SPMs have not been tested well on omega-3. We've not seen any studies to look at the effects of an SPM on omega-3 levels. What we have learned is if you are 8 to 12% with your blood, your body's going to naturally produce SPMs. Just don't take an ethyl ester. And how do you know that? If the brand doesn't say krill, if it doesn't say triglyceride, if it doesn't say monoglyceride, it is an ethyl ester. I can assure you that.
Uh, Quick terminology question. SPM,
pro-resolving mediator. That's kind of another, terminology. So that's, can't think of the SPM acronym, but it's a pro-resolving mediator. It's can't go into the detail. Dr. Harris could probably explain that. We had a whole webinar he did strictly on those, but those are typically taken as a standalone item to reduce inflammation.
Okay. So people, again, if you're spending too much time on YouTube University, you might be caught up in the debates, oils versus gel caps versus blister packs versus any other form. So does that move the needle? After we get past manufacturing, we've picked the right form, the triglyceride form. We get a reputable manufacturer. After that, how much is the matrix? And matrix, that refers to those things I talked about: oil versus a gel cap versus a blister pack,
Yeah.
and gummies. They have gummies now. I hate gummies, but go ahead. Take it away.
Yeah. I mean, truly, it just depends on what's the dose, regardless of the what method of administration. You can't get enough in a gummy. You have to take a lot of gummies. I mean, we've looked at that just because of, obviously it's exciting and easy to chew and it tastes better than an oil. Oil is probably going to be the most effective way to just be the most bioavailable and most effective way to increase levels if it's just a straight pure oil. But people don't like the smell of fish oil, and it's unless you add some really nice sweet things to that oil, and we have some technology out there now that's working to make it a little bit better. Then a soft gel is going to be number two in regards to administration. Uh, yeah, you don't see really any capsules because unless you have powdered omega-3, which there are powdered sources on the market, and then gummy. There's some now. I'm trying to think of what we do with our oil is inside the soft gel bottle. We add like a little desiccant that makes it smell like mint. So when people open the bottle, it smells fresh. But none of that really matters because it depends on if you're getting enough EPA and DHA in the right form, your levels are going to go up. Unless you have a GI disorder like IBS or Crohn's or something that's blocking fat absorption, or a very high intense athlete that we've seen some studies that we've been involved with. One particular was looking at college track and field athletes at a big university. They gave them an omega-3 product at about 3 grams, 3 to 3.5 grams per day of a triglyceride form oil. They measured their omega-3 indexes after 8 weeks, and they only went up 1.5%, which that shouldn't be the case. So either that oil was not manufactured at a high percent triglyceride form, because not all triglyceride form is the same percent, or what we think might be happening is they're training at such a high intensity, or they maybe not absorbing it into the cell. We don't know. So that needs to be replicated and studied again at some point.
So let's say, I'm going to prick my finger and we're going to get a lab result back, and I'm hoping to be an OmegaQuant affiliate, so get my clients tested, so we're not shooting in the dark, we're not flying the plane blind. What's a realistic expectation for how long we have to take it to get our ranges back into that magic 8% plus range?
Yeah, what I love about omega-3, not just the versatility of the nutrient in that higher levels can really improve a lot of different outcomes. It's how easy it is to get to an optimal range pretty quickly. So let's just say you're 4%, right? And you go, wow, to get to 8%, I got to double this. It could take 3 months, 2 to 3 months. If you take more than typical, like if I take a lot, so I try to maintain levels at 11 or 12%, not for any other reason beside if I stop taking it, my levels are going to drop. But within about 2 to 3 months, if you take 2 to 3 grams per day of combined EPA and DHA, your levels are going to move pretty well. You should be able to retest in 3 to 4 months and see that I'm in a good spot. If you're already at 7 or 8%, then whatever you've been doing is working. Maybe just increase it a little bit more to say, I want to get to 10% and give me a little cushion. And the reason I say that is because I was at 11.5%. I changed my dose. So I'm 50 now. And I was like, I wanted to go more EPA heavy than DHA just from a cardiovascular protection. So I went to 3 grams of EPA and about 1 gram of DHA per day. And my levels dropped to 9.9. And I usually test every 6 months. So I was like, all right, I'm not changing the EPA. I added another gram of DHA. I got back to 11.5. But DHA is truly what drives your score because DHA also converts to EPA. If you just take pure EPA, your EPA levels are going to look good, but you're not going to have really any DHA levels that are moving because it doesn't convert. EPA does not convert to DHA.
Okay, that's good. I'm gonna make sure you have enough of the DHA. We talked about the different form and said that as long as you're taking enough of it, and which can be hard to do with gummies, as long as you're taking enough of it, you're gonna get there, unless there's something wrong with you, right? Which is another reason why we test, because if you're deficient and you supplement and you're still not getting there, then there's something else wrong with you, and we need to take we need evasive maneuvering. Let's talk about the other risk. We touched on this earlier with oxidation risk, omega sixes. How big a risk is for oxidation with fish oil supplementation?
I mean, if you're using a good brand that goes through extensive testing, there's none. Those levels are set and standard by the IFOS, International Fish Oil Standard Association, GOED, Global Organization of EPA and DHA, and they set rules and regulations. So, just to kind of pull up a little slide I have that just kind of walks you through that. So, for like things like peroxide value, that's just the oxidation of the oil. Aninsodide value, same thing. It's how it breaks down oxidative stress of that oil and kind of just mostly polyunsaturated fatty acids, which are omega-3s, are ones that are higher risk of oxidation if you add oxygen to it, or it measures the unsaturation of the oxidation of that oil. Basically, what IFOS does and GOED, they set goals. So peroxide value can't be any higher than 5. Aninsodine is 20, Totox 19.5 roughly. Another one has 26. So the key is to make sure those oil manufacturers that produce oil, they have to be at or below. Most are below, but consumers don't know that and neither maybe does. I mean, I'm sure the supplement brand does, where they're getting their oil from, but unless you ask for, I want a certificate of authenticity, and I want to see what the heavy metals are in the product, then you're going to have to ask the supplement brand for that, because they're not going to tell you unless you ask.
That's interesting. Of course, am a big third-party testing nerd. We had a representative from Informed Choice, Informed Sport, Informed Protein, Informed Ingredient, Informed Manufacturer. They've got 5 different programs. Excellent. That's the one I endorsed. I just think they're the most thorough, the most convenient to use. Not to get on a too big a sidetrack, but I've invited NSF Sport and BSCG, their competitors, on the podcast. They have an open invitation, so I always like to throw that out there. What are they actually testing for versus GOED and IFOS?
Well, GOED and them they don't test. They set the standard and say this is what you have to make. A lot of these oil manufacturers, they're doing their own internal testing, plus it goes to third party. So what NSF, what Informed Sport, and I agree, Andy, Paul, those guys at Informed Sport, and even the folks at NSF, especially John Travis and those guys, they do a really nice job. But our fish oil is certified by Informed Sport. I think it's a little bit more rigorous when you look at things like batch testing, when you look at swabbing the facility. That's, like you said, a whole nother. But they're looking for banned substances first. That's the most important thing, is athletes that get drug tested. Does it have any adulteration inside that product that would cause them to test positive, whether it's a legal steroid, whether it's a diuretic, whether it's a stimulant. But again, if you're using any supplement, creatine, fish oil, protein, and it's got the NSF or it's got the Informed Sport logo, I mean, you're never 100% clean, but I don't think we've ever seen any cases where any of those products that truly were tested by those organizations had any banned substances in them. So athletes, college, pro, Olympic, should never be using a supplement, no matter who tells them to do so. Because there's a lot of untrusted individuals that I've seen when I was working with a few Olympic athletes way back in the day. They went to a healthcare provider, and I won't say what type, and that healthcare provider recommended a certain product, and they tested positive. And this Olympic athlete was the 6th fastest woman in the world, as for 100 meters. She had to sit out for a year. And I even told her, I was like, that's not that type of professional to trust, because they don't know the first thing about third-party tests. But yeah, in some cases, they're testing heavy metals. They're looking at other instances. But the brand itself will have a certificate from the manufacturing facility. So where these products are manufactured, meaning GC Reber is the oil supplier. They send their oil to the manufacturing facility, also known as a contract manufacturer. That company is the one that's encapsulating it, putting it in soft gels, putting it in bottles. They also go through a large lab test to determine, from the time the oil gets there from Norway to the manufacturing facility in the United States, has any oxidation happened? If it's kept sealed in a barrel, like most cases, then the answer should be no. But we have a finished report on all of our batches to know what's that value.
That's interesting. I don't know if we had talked about this before. If you'd like to explain briefly, OmegaQuant, you have your own product. You talked before about the manufacturer that you used, and I did not know that it was tested by Informed Sport, which of course just makes me more enthusiastic about it. Could you tell us about that product briefly and what it's called and how we can purchase it?
It's called Parasol Nutrition. Parasol. It's a sister company. We have to keep the lab and the supplement separate just from a regulatory standpoint. Yeah, Parasol been around a little over I think 3 to 4 years, about 4 years now. We got it certified for sport 3 years ago. Man, it's scaling quickly in that space. Couple of reasons. It's greater than 90% triglyceride form, so it's right around 97, 98% triglyceride. 1,400 milligrams of EPA and DHA per two soft gels. 50 to 100% less expensive than all the other certified for sport brands. So we're doing some pretty cool things in regards to specials for colleges and teams. I'll be at the CSCCA show next week. So next Monday and Tuesday, we're exhibiting there. I don't know, Andy, if you'll be there or not, but it's a really, and then we'll be at the ASPDA, which is all for sports dietitians in New Orleans in about 2.5 weeks. Yeah, we have a really cool program now for teams and schools that can buy our product in large volumes. They get free omega-3 testing as part of that, but it's pretty cool. I mean, it's a great oil. GC is the oldest supplier in the world of oil, and just we're helping a lot of schools test, but we're helping a lot of schools cut their budgets in half by using our oil, and then we're throwing in free testing on top of that. Like we just had two big universities just for football alone. We sent them 70 to 90 free test kits because of the amount of oil they bought.
I might see you in a couple weeks, New Orleans. New Orleans. I'm in Floribama, Pensacola, Florida. So
Yeah,
that's just
my wife and my daughter were just in Foley this weekend for a volleyball tournament.
yeah. So who knows? That I might make it my way up there to see you. Let's talk about some of the trends in this industry, the different stacks, which I kind of have a knee-jerk reaction to these different stacks and formulations. I kind of like simpler is often better, but we're seeing vitamin D, CoQ10, joint support, uh, other kind of antioxidant blends. When are we getting too clever? Is there any uh, value for spend justification there?
Yeah, I mean, I think those nutrients you mentioned, I mean, I personally like those nutrients. I take vitamin D, CoQ10. I think some of these blends might be a little. I think the challenge with a lot of the products we see on the market right now is just most of them don't have enough in them to really have a true benefit, right? We see a lot of proprietary blends of ingredients, especially in the world of sleep and cortisol management and things like that, or mushroom extracts, or the rise coffees of the world that you don't even know any idea how much mushroom extract you're getting from some of these products. But I think there's just not a lot of transparency. And I think it's important with any product you take is how much am I getting of that? If anything has a proprietary blend on it, that is an instant red flag, and you should just walk away and say, look, it's a big scam. And anybody that is trying to sell that, they know it. They're
Yeah,
selling products to people that don't know much about supplements.
yeah. Proprietary blend is code for I'm not going to tell you, and it's all. And the subtext of that subtext is that I have something to hide. And you're absolutely right. My other criticism with these blends is they almost never get it right. So my favorite now is this creatine HMB. Well, creatine you generally take it in one dose. HMB you've got to spread it throughout the day, and the ratios aren't ideal. So in order to take enough creatine, you're going to be taking too much H&B, which might not kill you. It's just a waste of money because that's an expensive ingredient,
Yep.
especially if you're getting my HMB, which is the only HMB with any clinicals behind it. But I digress, Tavis. So we're going to do first time on Feltovich Fits the Signal podcast. We're gonna draw blood uh, So walk me through this test. You handed me out one of these tests when I met you,
Yep.
and I would have been Fort Lauderdale 2 weeks ago. So what do I do? You gave me
Yeah, you
instructions,
should
but
have a yeah, you should have an alcohol pad in there.
all
There you go.
right.
Instructions. So yeah, alcohol pad. But before you mail that off, be sure to register that test kit is the in the portal. You'll set up an account. That way you can get your result. But there should be an alcohol pad. Make sure your hand's warm. Index finger or middle finger is the one you want to poke, and then warm it up. Use the alcohol pad, and then once you prick the side of that finger, whatever one I like to use my right index finger because I can prick it and then turn it lightly turn it over and let it drop into the circle. But you'll wipe the first spot of blood away with the gauze pad. So you want to make sure the gauze pad's open as well. And then squeeze it. Once you feel like you have enough light, turn it over and let it drop into the circle. You don't want to push it against it. If you don't, for me, my blood likes to hang out, and then sometimes it won't drop off, and if it doesn't, I'll lightly touch it against that circle. It should fill about 70% of that circle.
Okay. So I've wiped my finger with the got with the got sorry, wiped my finger with the alcohol pad.
Yep.
And now next step is we're gonna take needle to finger.
Yep.
Just yank her off.
Just twist it.
All right. So I've twisted it off.
Yeah, and then I mean, if you're right-handed, I like to just use my right finger, and then I'll keep it like that and kind of poke the top. No, like on the side, a little bit on the side.
On the side like this.
Yep.
All right, poke away.
Yep. Go ahead.
Fire when ready.
All right, and then
Not too bad.
use the gauze, wipe the first spot of blood away. You'll try
So
to
I don't,
squeeze it.
not
No,
sure.
no. Yeah, you didn't feel anything?
I did. So we got a little bit of blood. Not too much. Don't know if I did it enough.
Yeah, so what you'll have to do is put your hand down like that a little bit and start kind of milking the finger a little bit. That way it should
Okay. Yeah.
probably.
Now we've
All
got
right.
blood.
Yeah,
All right.
so once you have like enough to where
Yeah.
it's like a nice little bubble, keep going a little bit more, keep squeezing it. Then you'll turn that finger over and you'll squeeze it from the bottom all the way up, just like
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. I think we've got enough to drop now.
Yeah, and then turn it over and lightly put that finger next to that spot.
All right.
But just don't push it again. Yeah, there you go.
There we go.
Boom.
Bullseye.
That's perfect. That's a great spot.
All
Now
right.
you can just cover your finger and put the Band-Aid on or whatever you need, and then that should dry in about 15 to 20 seconds. You'll fill out that card, but then also make sure you go to the website and register that test kit. Yep, that looks great. That's a great spot.
Okay. So you gave me 3 circles and we only needed one.
That's because vitamin D and A1C, some other things that we have two different types of tests out. We have two tests that are not fatty acids. Everything else we do is fatty acid related. So, but we only sell A1C and vitamin D to healthcare providers. We don't sell those to consumers. They need
Okay.
three. They need 3 spots.
Okay, so that's good to know for the people at home. They don't need to go pricking up the countryside. Just one and done. Now the actual test I'm doing, and we discussed this. You kind of had three tiers. So kind of like Goldilocks and the three bears. This one didn't give me enough data. This one gives me too much data, and this one is just right. So what for our consumer at home who wants a full picture and doesn't need the full scientist toolkit, what is the name of the one that they want? The Goldilocks.
Yeah,
This one is just right.
yeah. So you're taking the plus, Andy. The basic is the basic test, which is just your overall omega-3 index. The plus will give them the omega-3 index, the omega-6 to 3 ratio, the arachidonic acid to EPA ratio, and the trans fat index. The complete is all 26 fatty acids and ratios. That is probably a little bit too much data for the typical consumer. I mean, even for most healthcare providers, they're like, this may be a little bit over their head in regards to fatty acids. So either the basic or the plus would be sufficient.
All right. Probably don't need my tourniquet. Looks like a Band-Aid. The Band-Aid you provided in the kit will be
Yeah, you'll be fine.
sufficient. So been super informative. We're coming up on time, so we want to make sure we get to the lightning round, and I'll be registering this test and sending it in quickly. Lightning round. The most overrated omega-3 marketing claim you've seen?
I don't know if it's omega-3, but it's just this whole fatty 15 thing. People are spending a lot of money, and it's one people don't realize is the research is not really clear on that. It's a dairy fat, and you drink milk, eat cottage cheese, you get plenty fatty 15, or C15 is the fatty acid. I think that's just something that's a lot of hype with little research to support, but we are as a lab looking to measure that just because people want to know what it is. So it's like, all right, well, maybe we'll offer that in the future. Not sure. Um, I think another thing too is when you look at, I guess, overrated marketing claim. I don't know if it's overrated in omega-3. I think it's more underrated in the fact that people are not measuring it enough. I think we need to include this as part of every initial health panel, like a cholesterol test, because some of the research we have shows that the prediction risk factors can be as important. We know total cholesterol is a fairly useless number, even some of the other markers outside of some extensive lipoprotein. So I think the most important thing is the fact that also I've heard too much fish oil causes prostate cancer. The other is AFib. I mean, we have research in healthy individuals. That's not the case when you look at blood. So again, we have to look at blood and not just look at fish oil in general.
You're absolutely right about the omega 15s. I'm interested in other fatty acids. We talked about omega 7s and macadamia nuts. It's an interesting hypothesis. I'm curious about what they do, but when you look into the research behind it, it's a great big black hole. Uh, Personal note before we close out, what's the one thing that you wish you could tell your younger self? Something I ask all my guests.
Invest in Bitcoin. You go back and invest in Bitcoin and put a lot of money there. Yeah, man, when I've had guests on, I would ask them the same question, and I've always said, I wonder what I would tell myself I could go back and do. I think one would be an entrepreneur early in life. Work for yourself early on. I love what I do. I have no plans on ever leaving OmegaQuant unless they tell me to leave. At 50, I'd love to have another 10 good years of work because I don't want to be working until I'm 80 years old or 75. I think that's not, maybe even whatever, but I love what I do. But I think it's important for people at some point to where, they have a little flexibility to do some things on their own too. I think early on, that way they have full control. But I'm fortunate to where I work for a company that they're awesome, great people, family owned. It's not corporate based, and I get to sell things that I love that has research behind it. There's no snake oil, and you get a lot of support. So, but I think just for the average person, it's just try to give yourself flexibility with what you do in regards to your career, and always have the options outside to go and do some things that you love. I would tell myself to be an offensive coordinator for football. That's what I was telling my wife the other day. It's just like during football season, I'm calling plays, like the next play should be this. And then I'll say something, and then the announcer will say it, and she just looks and goes, you really missed your calling. You should have been a sportscaster, or you should have been an offensive coordinator. And I'm like, sportscaster probably would be a lot less stressful than, the constant job change that you see, in the world of football
Yeah.
coaches, because the head coach of college football is the fired head football coach in college football is the best job ever. You're sitting at home collecting tens of millions of dollars and you don't have to go to work.
Yeah, I think you're right about sportscaster. Less stress, especially if you keep keep a bottle in your drawer, a la Howard Cosell. Well, Tavis, it's been a great honor to host you today. For our listeners at home who want to follow you and learn more, what should they be doing?
Well, yeah, I mean, they can always reach out to us at OmegaQuant. I mean, I think it's, you can always reach me at Tavis at OmegaQuant.com. Obviously, go through Andy for any type of testing needs that you guys have. I know you said setting up your affiliate because I think it'd be really great to get that stuff from you. Yeah, but I mean, if it's more professional based and you want to reach out for a team, a sport, an organization, I'm happy to kind of meet with you guys and we can talk about that a little bit more.
Well, thank you again, Tavis. It's been a great honor to host you, and hopefully I'll be seeing you in New Orleans in a couple weeks.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Andy. Really appreciate it. Honored to be here.
Honored to have you. Take care.
Have a good one.